Well, good morning, everyone. I have the pleasure of speaking to you today, and it's a topic that I really am passionate about. So it's a nice week to be able to speak with you all. We're starting a new series this week based on Elijah and Elisha, and today we'll kind of do an intro to that and talk about some mentoring things, and then next week Mark will speak, followed by Josh, and just go through the ministry and the aspects of it. And I hope you're encouraged by it, especially with what we talked about today too. Today we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna talk a little bit about when they meet up, when Elisha is called by Elijah, and then really go into mentoring and bringing up the next generation, specifically in the church, which I think is really, really important. So the first thing I want to do is just give you some context about this. If you aren't familiar with the story, or maybe it's been a while, we're starting in 1 Kings 19, and what's happened up to now, just a little brief thing. Elijah, the prophet, he was a prophet in northern Israel, and he just had defeated the prophets of Baal. And if you remember that story, the prophets of Baal and him kind of had a contest on whose God was stronger. Their God didn't show up. He kind of mocked them and made fun of them, which is kind of comical. And then God showed up and just destroyed everything on his altar. And it was pretty impressive, to say the least. But after that, the prophets of Baal turned to God, and Jezebel got word of it, who was the queen at that time, and she was not happy. And she said, basically, I'm going to kill you, and I promise to do it before tomorrow, basically. So Elijah fled into the wilderness, and during that time, he kind of got a little depressed, I guess you'd say. He asked God, like, can you just let me die now? I think I'm good, I'm done with this whole thing. And it's kind of a sad point, but God keeps him alive. He miraculously provides for him in the wilderness, and towards the end of that time, he says, all right, it's time for you to move on now. You're going to go appoint 2 new kings and appoint a prophet underneath you to raise up named Elisha. Now, those names I'm going to mess up at some point, I'm sure of it, Elijah and Elisha, because pretty close. So that's where we are. But I think it's going to be on the screen too, but if you have a Bible as well, we are in 1 Kings 19, starting at verse 19. And that says, so Elijah went from there and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat. Now he went from there, meaning where he was in the wilderness. He was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha then left his oxen and ran after Elijah. Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, he said, and then I will come with you. Go back, Elijah replied. What have I done to you? So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he set out to follow Elijah and became his servant. So before we get into the mentoring aspect of it, there's a few things that I think are key in that, just that short passage. The first thing is Elisha was farming, basically. He was in the fields plowing. He wasn't in a prestigious position. He wasn't in ministry, anything like that. He was in the fields. So no matter where his family might have been as far as their status or anything like that, he was a hard worker. He was working with these other people. He was on the 12th, basically with the 12th pair of oxen. And that shows something about that. Sometimes we forget when we're bringing up someone in ministry or anything like that. Sometimes the first place we look is the colleges. The first place we look is maybe someone that's already in the church. And these people, they really weren't. They were in a totally different field in life. I guess no pun intended. I didn't even, because the field. But so you don't think of that very often. And I think sometimes we forget that too. That all throughout Scripture that happens. God picks the people that we might not really think would be the best for the job. We see that with David when he was brought into what God wanted him to do. He was tending the sheep in the field. He wasn't even with the brothers, if I remember correctly, when they were trying to decide who was going to be king. Peter was a fisherman, not very prestigious. Paul was a tent maker, and even Jesus was a carpenter by trade. And so we see that hard work and willingness to do jobs that might not be, I guess, the best or the most pleasant. Really, that doesn't matter because God knows the heart. He knows the work ethic. He knows these people will get his mission done. So I think that's important to see. It's not always, I think of if we're going to get an intern for the church, the first place we look at is college. And that makes sense because college credits, all that, they have to do that. But there might be someone who's not even in that has gifts for this. So I think it's really important to remember that when we're talking about bringing up the next generation in the church. The second thing I found that was significant, I thought, in this passage was the significance of the cloak, of Elijah's cloak. In the cloak, it's fairly simple. I think throwing a coat over someone's shoulders might signify something similar today, like they're under your wing or something. But basically, the cloak was a sign of a prophet, and it would have been recognized pretty widely in that time in Israel. So he threw it over Elisha's shoulders, and that was basically like, all right, here you go. You're under my wing. Come with me. But it could also be a sign of adoption, which is pretty cool, too, as far as the spiritual sense. He's kind of adopting him into this mission that God's called him into. The third thing is Elisha honors his parents. And I think this is interesting because I've heard people, it depends on your background of Christianity, what you might think of this. But when you see Elisha say, let me go back to my parents and say goodbye, basically. The first thing I thought of was Luke 9 and Luke 14. And in both of those, in Luke 9, someone's approaching Christ and being like, I want to follow you, but let me bury my father first. And he basically says to him, let the dead bury their own dead. And he doesn't follow him. But what we're seeing there is it's a heart issue. It's not a I don't care about your family. It's a conflicted heart, and Christ can see that in them. Luke 14 is the same thing. That's where Jesus basically says, whoever doesn't hate his family can't call himself my disciple. Now, obviously, Christ doesn't want us to hate our families, because there's nothing in the Bible to support that, other than taking this verse the wrong way, I think. But what it is again, the conflict of the heart. And when Elisha said, let me go say goodbye to my family, there was no conflict. He had already made the choice. He ran after Elijah, said, I'm going to go with you, just let me say goodbye. So it was really a way to honor his parents and kind of be like, hey, I'm leaving, by the way. And we can see that, too, that he's determined to leave and go with Elijah because he burns his equipment to basically cook this meal for his family. There's nothing for him to go back to now, which I thought was really, really interesting. And like I said, depending on your background, some of us tend to think as we're growing up, like, if I'm going to follow God, I have to give up everything I love, or he's going to take everything I love. That's not true. God obviously wants him to be first in your life, but it's the heart is the big thing, the conflicted heart versus the heart that's going to follow after Christ with nothing else in the way. And then the fourth thing is where this leads us is Elisha follows Elijah. Basically runs back to him, and this is where we set off on this kind of journey. And this is where I really want to talk about mentoring now and the importance of mentoring. It was me and Josh and Lauren went to a conference down in Atlanta, Georgia, and called the Orange Conference. And it was pretty cool. And I was like, I don't know, like the first day, and it was like, it's nice, but I haven't heard anything like crazy mind-blowing yet. But the last session of the last day was this group that I wasn't even sure I wanted to go to, because the title was, I don't know, it wasn't anything that caught me particularly, but he talked about basically the next generation, millennials, and then iGen or Gen Z, which would be the one after millennials. Basically, they're the generation that's grown up with technology at their fingertips the whole time. Millennials kind of integrated with it, all that. So if you didn't know those terms, I hope that kind of clears it up. But he went into this whole thing where we think so many things about these people and these generations that maybe aren't true, but we still need to get them in the church, and they seem to be leaving the church, and what do we do? And it was really, really cool to hear him talk about basically mentoring and bringing up the next generations in the church. So some things I found here. So the importance of mentoring. The first thing I want to talk about is mentoring is mutually beneficial. And we can even see this looking at Elijah and Elisha. I mean, if you look at Elijah, he just wanted to die, right? Before we found him here. He was like, let me die, I'm done. And then he found Elisha, and as we'll see, there's encouragement when you have someone underneath you and able to kind of shoulder that burden with you. So Elijah finds encouragement in Elisha in doing ministry together, like I said, shouldering that burden. And then obviously the one that's being mentored, they gain perspective and wisdom and knowledge, and they sharpen their skills. Someone to keep them accountable. That's important for young people too. So mentoring is mutually beneficial. In our lives, it's the same case. I think sometimes as we grow up, like even me, I find you can become like cynical and kind of detached from what's going on and upcoming, and as far as the youth and as far as the next generation, you kind of get tunnel vision on what you think life is like. And being with the younger generation, mentoring them, bringing them up, you get a new perspective of, oh, it's not like that still, or maybe this is changing. And the cynicism can kind of go away. Maybe it gets worse. I don't know. But for me, it goes away because you see so many young people really wanting to follow God and really wanting to come up the right way. And then again, those being mentored, they just gain wisdom, and they, whatever wisdom they can get from you, and their experiences and their skills, it's all sharpened. And like I said, accountability is huge too, as far as work ethic, what they expose themselves to, how to handle different situations. It helps you both. So when you think of mentoring as a mentor type thing, or someone that would be mentored, it's not. You don't just get drained. Basically, there is something that comes back to you as well. It might not always be forever or right away, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it does encourage you for sure. The second thing is those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And you've probably heard that phrase before. But I think that's very, very true, especially in the younger generation. If looking back through history, not even that far, maybe a couple decades, there used to be a lot more communication between generations. I feel like now there's a little more of a divide, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. But it seems now, too, if you see people coming up through the universities and everything else, they have no idea about what's happened even in our country or anything like that in society, and they have these ideas, and you're just like, no, we've tried that. Doesn't work. Like if you would just, learn from people that are older than you, you might see a different perspective, things that might not have worked in the past. And personally, I know I'm the youngest of 4 brothers, so I saw 3 brothers kind of grow up and fumble around and make dumb mistakes, make good decisions, and I was able to learn from them. So even if you're not much older than someone or much younger than someone, you can still learn from them. Usually, I always encourage my students, try to find someone that's just a step ahead in life, just one chapter ahead in life at least to learn from. And even my mentors, I've seen mentors be really good, and I've seen mentors really fail. And luckily I was taught to depend on God, not a person. So when they failed, I knew, God's not failing me. It's just a person. They make mistakes. But you learn, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. So those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So it's really, really helpful if we teach the younger generation what's worked, what hasn't. And in ministry, or if you have your own business or whatever, don't reinvent the wheel. It's so easy for people. I know for me, when I was new in ministry, I still am new in ministry, but when I was like fresh out of college, there were so many things I wanted to do, and the church I was at was like, we've tried that. It doesn't really work. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can go off of people's accomplishments, learn what they've learned. Not everything works the same way in every church or in every business. Learn to work off of people's accomplishments. Third thing for that is mentoring builds character. And I think this is especially true in this day because everything's so instant. I mean, I think if you're in the Nashville area, you can get an Amazon package in an hour. Is that right? Something like that? I'm young, but I do remember having to go through a catalog and filling out a form and mailing it in. I'm not that young. So I mean, everything is so instant. I mean, we could go grocery shopping on our phone if we wanted to, and be there in an hour. So learning the difference between hard work and instant gratification, I think, is huge. And many people grow up too without many troubles, which is a good thing. I mean, we live in a peaceful society for the most part, especially like this generation and maybe the last one too. But there aren't many huge struggles, especially in an area like this where it's a pretty good area. And you might go through college, and I saw some of my friends do this. They went through Bible college. They were in a good family, good church, Bible college, into ministry, and that's where they hit the wall. And they get reality of what ministry is really like. How many of you are serving in ministry or have served in ministry as a volunteer or staff or anything like that? Is ministry really easy? No, there's crap that you deal with that you never thought you'd have to deal with. Yeah, because I forget who always says it. Someone always says, the best thing about ministry is the people, and the worst thing about ministry is the people, right? And it's true, because you love the people, that's why you're in ministry. But I mean, people are hard to deal with, and we're hard to deal with, even each of us, that are saying that. And you don't realize how much junk goes on behind the scenes until you get there, and you're faced with it, sometimes as a leader. So, I mean, if those students that I saw kind of hit that wall and get discouraged, I knew if they had a mentor, maybe they would have seen that. See, I had a mentor that caused a huge problem in a church. And while I was just going to college, so he was my closest mentor, taught me everything, music, all that. And I saw him kind of fail. And luckily, he was brought back into ministry and everything there. But, lost my train of thought. Sorry, I'm sick too, and I'm like medication. So if I'm a little foggy, I'm sorry. But basically, you can, it's hard. Ministry is hard work, is what I'm getting at. And dealing with people, it's messy. And dealing with people takes a long time. Now, I'm sure you parents out there know that some things you teach your kids. I'm not a parent, so I'm not speaking by any, into any authority. What you teach your kids might not manifest itself until like midway through life. You might think they don't listen to me. They never hear me. Or as a teacher, you might think that. And then years later, they'll be like, oh yeah, my teacher, my parent taught me this, and that's what I've always lived by. And you're like, I didn't even think you heard me. So sometimes you just don't know. It takes a lot of time. If you're looking for instant gratification with this, on either end, mentor or to be mentored, that's just not how it works usually. And then, like I said, it's not always easy, but you learn the value of hard work, and young people want to be mentored. Have been doing this series on Wednesday nights with the students called Questions, and I was looking for a series to do a couple months ago, and I was like, why don't we just ask them what their questions are and answer them? And the first question that I got that we went over was, how do I build my character? I was like, that's a pretty deep question for a teen. I don't know who asked it. It was all random. But kudos to whoever did. It was good. But we got to go into how do you legitimately and practically build your character. So they're looking for that. They're not just, we think the younger generation, they're just on their phones the whole time. They don't really care. Me and Becca were talking a couple days ago about being on your phone. And when you're with, I don't know, when you're standing around in the lobby of church or something, and you're like this, and you're not talking to anyone, you kind of sit against the wall. It's not necessarily that you don't want to talk to people. It's just that you don't know what to do with yourself. And sometimes that happens with students too. They just don't know what to do with themselves. They feel awkward or disconnected, so they go to the place where they feel connected. That's some of the psychology behind it, I think, because even I do that. And it's times where I don't feel totally comfortable. Sometimes I'm busy and have something to do, but sometimes I'm not totally comfortable. I'd rather just sink back and be where see something that I'm comfortable with, or talk to people that are miles away or whatever. It's not always like, I don't want to talk to you, go away. And when we see that with the younger generation too, I think it's important not to always see them as kind of like being like, no, go away. They do have the desire to be mentored, at least to some capacity. And if they don't, then they need it, so talk to them. So specifically mentoring the next generation, we've talked about why it's beneficial and how it's beneficial. But when we mention the next generation, like I said, millennials, Generation Z, you might kind of flinch at that because maybe you know some of the stereotypes, and maybe this video is what you think of them.
Amy, it says you are trained in technology. That's very good. Are you adept at Excel?
No.
PowerPoint?
No.
Publisher?
Not really.
Exactly in what area of technology are you proficient?
Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Vine, Twitter. The big ones.
I'm surprised you didn't say Facebook.
That's for old people, like my parents. That's funny.
Well, Amy, when you're working for me, you have to have those kind of research skills, because I'll send you things for you to comb through and get the answers and send them to me. So for that, you've got to be really good at technology.
For stuff like that, no problem. I'll just ask Siri.
You'll just ask Siri?
Siri, tell me this, Siri, find me that. We're all good getting you the answers.
Tell Siri, I want you ready to go at 8 sharp each and every morning.
I don't understand.
What don't you understand?
What you just said.
You don't understand be ready to go?
No. You said 8, right?
Yes.
8 like in the morning 8?
Yes, in the morning.
Yeah, that kind of doesn't work for me. Who gets up at 8?
I do.
I Skype with my French boyfriend in Paris until like 3 in the morning. I don't even get to Starbucks until like 10, where I order my grande chai tea latte, 3 pumps, skim milk, light water, 2% foam, extra hot, but not too hot. So if it's okay, I work best in the morning at 10:45.
Wow. Amy, I don't think we're going to be a good fit.
Why are you so negative? I can sense your hostilities, and right now I am not feeling very safe. I've been here for over 5 minutes, and the only nice thing you have said to me was nice resume, which I typed all night for this meeting with you. You've given me no guidance, no validation, no encouragement, no supervision. Is there an HR director somewhere?
HR director?
Yes, I need to speak to someone. I may have to take off today as a mental health day.
Take the day off. Amy, look at me. You don't work here.
Are you firing me?
Okay, yes.
So I get a little uncomfortable watching that because I know people like that. It's scary. But so in the conference that I was at in this breakout session, this is what this guy was talking about. His name was Dr. Steve Argue, and he researched all this stuff about millennials, the next generation, and how they kind of fit into the church, what stereotypes we should do away with. It's funny, when I did a web search for the top results of millennials are, and here's the top 8 I configured. Lazy, entitled, spoiled, stupid, ruining America, crybabies, idiots, and narcissistic. Now, I mean, there's plenty of that, but I don't think it is the majority. I think the minority is just louder, which happens a lot of times. The minority of a group of people is just louder, and we tend to think that that's what they're all like, and they're not necessarily. So millennials, I don't believe they're all like that. And part of the reason we think that, and maybe some of you have heard this, but adolescence used to be from about 12 to 18. All right, so that's teenage years, you're kind of growing up into being adult. And then 18, you're an adult. You're time to go into real life and start doing things. That's not the case at all anymore. I don't know any 18-year-old maybe that I would consider an adult yet. Maybe they're mature, but there's just something there that's not quite there yet. And in this breakout session, he was saying that in his research, adolescence is now 10 to 30. So it's grown about a decade. So if you're like, this person just won't grow up, it's because they're still growing up. And it's true. There's so many people that are my age or a little older that are still in their adolescence. And some of that has to do with upbringing, some of it has to do with how society is structured now, all that, but that's the truth of it. People are still growing up and through their 20s. So we have to, once you understand that, you can not treat them like a teenager, no offense teenagers, but they're figuring out who they are. So we need to break the stereotype, I think, of that generation and of the one coming up under them. Because what happens is we basically hold an entire generation at arm's length when you do that to them. So if you see someone walk through the door like my age or younger and you're like, a millennial, they're probably lazy, probably entitled, they're probably going to look at this church and be like, it doesn't fit my needs, and then walk away. Because that's usually how millennials, we think. But there's a lot of millennials, especially in the church I see today, that are not looking for the flashiest thing, that are not looking for, just an entertainment church. They're looking for something to dig their heels into and learn in. And the sooner we realize that and dig into that idea that they're not like this, or not all like this, I think the better we'll be able to bring them up in the church. And I think too, much of the stereotype of the younger generation is a little because of understanding or lack of understanding. And how many have heard the whole thing where college students leave the church in huge masses, basically? Once they go to college, they're gone. They might come back once they have kids, but they're totally gone. And as I was listening to this guy in the breakout session, he was like, that's not true at all. And he gave these statistics. He said 80% of college students have an interest in spirituality, whatever that may be. I know spirituality is a pretty broad definition. 75% believe in God. 88% of undergrad, their preferences stem out of Christian traditions, the field they go into. Few of them would say that they're spiritual, not religious. How many have heard that saying? I'm spiritual, but not religious. It's like, what does that even mean? But they don't identify with that. And then 65% have felt distant from God. So if you feel distant from God, there's a good chance you probably believe in God, right? And you know something's up, and you need to change something. So what he said, which I thought was really interesting, he said, if we don't find religion today in the predictable places and forms, it doesn't mean it's gone. These people still want that connection to the church. And it might not be how we have done it in the past, but they still are looking for that connection. And he said, too, we need to integrate them into the church and not just section them off. And I have some things in the works we've been talking with, or I've been talking with my youth leadership, and how do we get our students more involved in the church and not just down in youth ministry, and how do we bring them up through their youth being in the church, as a part of the church? Because, what do we all want? We want to all kind of have ownership of it, right? We don't all want to be just like, this is my class and this is where I stay. You want to feel like you're a part of it, like you're a part of the foundation of it. And how do we do that with the next generation? How do we kind of bring them up so we can step aside eventually? Because we're not going to be here forever, but we hope the church will be, right? Or this church. So how do we raise them up to kind of take on the responsibilities of the church? And it might not be. I'm not saying I know how it is, but maybe there's something we need to look at, like how do we do this maybe a little different than we've done it in the past. Another thing about the next generation, we need to understand that not all differences are bad. Some differences are bad, like morally wrong, all that, but not all are bad. Sometimes they're just different. And that's not coming from like a moral relativism type thing or anything like that. Like, there are things that just are amoral, that are different, that are okay. Me and Becca were talking about, like, what is the older generation, like the baby boomers or anything like that, and us, what do we just totally not see eye to eye on? And she was like, napkins. Napkins. And we found this article about how millennials are ruining the napkin industry, basically. And I was like, that's really weird. So I'm like, what do we get? Paper towels. We get paper towels. And there's some research into that. It's on like Business Insider or something like that, where basically millennials aren't buying napkins, they're buying paper towels, because paper towels are more, have more uses and everything else. They're a little tougher, and we hardly ever eat at home. So we just grab it and go and whatever. We just don't have napkins. Then I was like, that's pretty true. When we first moved into lived in a townhouse in Pennsylvania, and when we first moved in, we had like a cookout and stuff, and we got this thing of napkins, and it sat in our pantry mostly full for 3 years, untouched. And then one time, like, I think it was a holiday or something, our parents came over and we used them, but our parents brought another thing of napkins, and we had more napkins. We threw them out when we moved. Like, we do not use napkins. It's really, really weird. Like, stuff you just don't think about. I used them all the time as I was a kid, and we order paper towels like it's like our job. So there's little things like that. We just totally different, and it's because life has changed. Life is crazy. I'm sure older people there think life moves so fast now. Like I said, everything's instant, and that's how it is. Like, and that's changed basically how a generation is brought up and how they interact with things, even products. There's so many articles about millennials are ruining this business and whatever. It's just interesting that other businesses are also coming up. Like, it's not all just bad. Like, there's just things that are changing. But to get into another thing, me and my dad were talking a couple months ago about cell phone plans. And we were trying to find the cheapest thing because we're trying to find something that's like kind of, we can not spend too much money, so we're on a family plan together and each pay our share and all that stuff. And he's like, this is crazy. It's like $100 a month for a cell phone. That's insane. Like, just $100 a month so I can call people. And I was like, but Dad, you do so much more with that phone. Like, we do everything on our phones. I do like half of my work on my phone and communicate with people. For Generation Z, the next generation coming up, people said that they're the first generation where the definition of phone is not a primary definition of calling people. Like, that's not what they use their phone for primarily. It's a GPS, it's the internet, it's a computer. I mean, it really is. It's a way to talk to their friends with instant messaging, text messaging. It's an iPod. All that stuff was separate for me, and like even early in my life, didn't exist. And so I was like, Dad, well, how much do you pay for cable? He's like, probably over $100 a month. It's like, I don't have cable. Like, generations, they value different things. Like, we just stream stuff at like $8 a month. We couldn't picture spending $100 a month on something to watch, but we will spend $100 a month on our phone. So things just change. The differences come up, and it's just part of different generations. On a more serious note, too, 30 years ago, when someone in their mid-20s or in their 20s moved back in with their parents, they were a failure. Like, they were a bum, probably, right? And there's this kind of the stigma that still kind of is going on about, what are you talking about, you're 30 and you live with your parents? Like, why don't you get a real job and all that stuff? But now, if a 20-something moves into his parents' house, it's like, that's a good decision. You can save up some money. Like it's a good financial decision, really. I mean, because now we graduated college with anywhere from like $50,000 to $100,000 in debt and even more. So any good financial decision we can make, we do. So moving with your parents is not necessarily a bad thing now. It's actually a wise thing sometimes. Where then it was like, what are you doing with your life? So things just change. We have this perception of the way it was when I was growing up is probably still the same for you, but it's not always true. Like I said, it's because that adolescence window has grown so much. And it's kind of frustrating being like these people, these humans, are basically adolescents are crazy and not grown up for 2 decades of their life, 20 years of their life. Like, what are we supposed to do with that in society? You can look at it like that, or you can look at, we have a little bit more time to mentor them and to bring them up and to show them how life is actually, like how to get through life the right way. So you have more time now. It can be looked at as a very good thing. Experiences in my life with being mentored, I'd probably be like dead in a ditch if I didn't have the mentors in my life, and that's very honest. I wasn't like a bad kid, and my mom would be like, he was a perfect kid. I was not a perfect kid. I did a lot of stupid things. I got away with a lot, and just towed the line before I would get caught. You know what I mean? But I had these influences in my life where if I didn't have that, it would have been a whole lot worse. I'm sure there's those of you in here that can probably say the same thing. Like I said, my brothers, there was good and bad examples in each of my brothers' lives. Like, I saw the good things they did, I saw the bad things they did. And I learned from it. That was just natural growing up. You always, if you're the youngest, you always have those siblings to look up to, or not look up to, depending on what they're doing. And then I had a mentor through middle school and high school who was the worship pastor at my church, and he kind of brought me in and got me playing music and everything like that. And he was kind of the core mentor in my life. But there were other people too, mostly on the worship teams, because I did that since I was in 6th grade. That just kind of naturally kind of brought me under their wing, showed me things, took interest in what I was interested in. That's huge. If any of you are salesmen or know how to like kind of schmooze somebody, I guess, in a business deal or anything, you ask them about them, right? You don't talk about yourself the whole time. And that's how you show someone that they're important to you. You talk about them. What are you doing with your life? What is your goal? What is your gift? What do you want to do? And then you kind of talk through that and help them. You don't get that if you're just like, oh yeah, well I'm doing this, and you should probably think about doing something like that too, and that doesn't really work. But these people really talked about and dug in, to the common interests. And I think that's huge. If you have common interests with a younger person, take them under your wing. Like I said, that's part of what we're trying to figure out how to do that more with youth and get them mentored in practical ways, but also spiritual ways, because all the mentoring we do, no matter who you are, should be based on Scripture, right? It should be based on the gospel and Scripture and God's truth. Otherwise, it can go all kinds of crazy ways. And I'm sure there's experiences in here with mentors that didn't quite teach the right thing or anything like that. But we need to make sure we're constantly basing it on Scripture as well. And I've had my bad experiences with mentorship too. I've been the token millennial in the room for diversity and generations. And I've been the one who was actually heard before, too. Mentoring isn't, like I said, it's messy. Sometimes it's going to be rough, and sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's going to be bad. But it's absolutely necessary to bring people up and give them ownership and give them wisdom and experience and everything like that. So some practical ways to do this. Just a couple of things here. Kind of maybe this is what you're thinking, maybe this is what you've thought about mentorship. Like I said, it all needs to be based on Scripture. That's the most important thing. But one thing I see is build simple relationships with the next generation. I had this friend in college who was a couple years older than me, and he wanted to mentor me, and I was like, okay, cool. I don't know anyone here, so sure. And he was nice enough, and I think we're still friends. I haven't talked to him in like years, but anyway, we sat down for lunch one day, and I didn't know him, he didn't know me, and he was just like asking these really personal questions. I was like, dude, I'm not going to share that with you. I don't even know who you are. Like, you're also my RA, so this is really weird. Like, I'm not going to tell you this stuff. So it's just like, yeah, I'm good, yeah, I read my Bible, like stuff like that. Like, keep it pretty minimal. But he wanted these deep questions. He's like, dude, we don't even have a relationship right now. So building simple relationships is key. Like I said, just going out to eat or having a meal with someone is huge because you just spend time with them. Ask them, ask them what they're doing, ask them how that you can help them. Simple relationships will build trust, and then you can get into the deep stuff. That's really, really critical because no one's gonna, I'm sure most of you, without a relationship or trust, aren't gonna share the deepest parts of your life. And then something I thought that was interesting that, again, was from the conference. Dr. Steve Argue was talking about the phrase, when I was your age. How many of you have said when I was your age to someone? Oh, come on, I know there's more. Yeah, I say it. And he basically was saying, get it out of your vocabulary. And, it's okay if you're like, kind of making funny comparisons or something. When I was your age, I had to walk uphill both ways in snow and sleet. Like, that's kind of how it, the typical one goes. But what that does is basically says, I'm over you. This is probably how you should do it, is how I did it. It's kind of like kind of just pushes aside what they're going through. But he said what you should ask or say more than when I was your age is, tell me more about that or explain that to me. Like I said, find interest in them. Ask questions that show that you care and not just, well, when I was your age, it wasn't like that. It was a lot better. Okay, but maybe this is just different. Maybe it's one of those things that's not bad or good. It's just different. Maybe we can learn from each other. And then I had this professor in college, and he always said, work yourself out of a job in ministry. I always thought that was interesting because, I know I've heard of big churches like the pastor is looking to retire, and they're like, what are we going to do? We're a huge church, and we depend on this person. And basically, if you're in ministry or any type of leadership, if you leave and it crumbles, you're not leading right. I know I'm just like basically a kid to some of you, saying like, you're not leading right if you don't do this, but really, if you leave what you're doing as a leader and it crumbles, then there's something needs to change, something needs to be added. You need to work yourself out of a job, basically. And we all fear, like that there's that pride part of us, but also probably that insecurity part of us that fears being obsolete and not needed. I'm sure if I asked you to raise your hand if you wanted to feel needed, we'd probably all raise our hand to some degree. So when we say work yourself out of a job, you're like, well, then I won't have a job. No, not necessarily. You'll have someone to shoulder that burden with you, just like we see in Elijah and Elisha, and like we'll see in the following weeks. But you also have someone to take your place after. Raise leaders underneath you as you're a leader, so it doesn't crumble after you're gone. It's huge. I mean, we see that with everyone through the Bible has done that. We see Christ did that. Just huge examples of raising up leaders underneath you, so you are not basically the I don't know. If you leave, it all crumbles. That's very, very important, I think. And it kind of forces you to bring up leaders knowing as much as you do. To teach them what you know. And then the phrase, too, I've heard a lot of people say this, I can't mentor anyone right now because I need to get my own life together. Yeah, we all do, because we're all people, and you'll probably be dead before you can not say that sentence anymore. That's the reality of it. We're all really messed up, and we're trying to get through life and trying to live according to God's word. That's not really a good excuse. If you look at the disciples, Christ called them when they were nobodies, when they weren't even like good people necessarily. He called them tax collector. Tax collectors were synonymous with basically criminals, with thieves. In that time. It's not like your H&R Block guy today. It's someone that would come to your house and be like, give me your money. That was the tax collector. And these are the people Christ called. If they were like, I need to get my life together first, that wouldn't work out for Christ. He'd be like, no, you're going to come with me anyway. You'll learn along the way. And we saw the disciples do stupid things in Scripture, like fighting over who was going to sit on what side of Christ, and then like just all this stuff, like not wanting Christ to go and basically fulfill his mission on the cross, standing in front of him. Jesus even told Peter, like, get behind me, Satan, because it wasn't what God's will was. So we saw the disciples do some stupid things, and it's okay because they had a mentor, they had Christ there to tell them, no, this is how it should be. So don't let the thought of, I need to get my own life together first, stop you from mentoring someone. Now, obviously, there's some things like if there's a lifestyle that you're trying to work through, I can understand that. But for the most part, I mean, if you're trying to live according to God's word, but you still have a mess, it's okay. I mean, the biggest thing is the next generation can learn from that. They learn from honesty. It's a huge thing with my generation and the next one. They can sense authenticity really quickly. So if you pretend to be perfect, they'll immediately sniff that out and be like, I'm good. I don't want really any advice from you. But if you're like, I really have struggles with this, they're like, yeah, so do I, because we're human. And so that really opens a door to vulnerability and to learning too, if you're honest with that. And as we wrap up, and we're going to go into communion, and the worship team is going to come up. I just want to encourage you that just like I was saying, how we need to be bringing up the next generation, and we need to call them into whatever they're supposed to do and what God has gifted them to do. Christ called us when we weren't desirable at all. We see that in Scripture all the time. He called us when we were enemies of God. You might see a young person in the younger generation who you're just like, oh, they're a nightmare. But maybe you could help them not be. Maybe you could help bring them up, because we were all nightmares at one point. And especially, in spiritual terms, like I said, we were enemies of God, and Christ called us, and He gave His life for us. He passed on His mission to us. So the usher's going to come forward and pass out communion, and the band's going to play. And I just want you to really focus on that, the fact that Christ called you when you were desirable. He calls you to work with the maybe less desirable. He calls you to bring up the younger generation, make disciples, because this is what He gave His life for, to bring us into His family. And to call us. So the band's going to sing, and you can take communion on your own. And after you take communion, I ask you to join the team in worshiping.